Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaVallee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about the superpower of feeling deeply. I suffered with a chronic low-level anxiety for much of my life. And although I was absolutely a fear-based person, and a major part of my personal growth work continues to be dissolving and resolving fear in my life, as my relationship with my own emotions has grown and matured and evolved, it's become clear to me that a lot of what I experienced as existential anxiety, the kind of constant low-level angst, tension, that pit in my stomach that things weren't quite right, that anxiety was like a thin sheet of ice on a deep and wild lake of unfelt feelings. I grew up in a very unemotional family. In fact, expressing anything but mild pleasantry or low-level depression was called emotionalism, like it was a disease. There was no crying, no yelling, not much loud laughter. I understand it now as kind of emotional purgatory for a deeply feeling person like myself. Although I didn't know I was a deeply feeling person, and because emotions were pathologized and looked at as weakness or some form of immaturity, I learned very early to push those babies down. And I internalized within myself that emotions were useless and bad. They were kind of like going to the bathroom, something you did in private and didn't talk about because they were too stinky or messy for polite conversation. I gotta tell you, I hate polite conversation. I find it deadly dull. And after decades of therapy, 12-step meetings, and personal growth work, my relationship with my feelings is now one of respect, curiosity, and even awe and inspiration. It's been incredibly valuable to dissolve the cultural lie that feelings are weak and have my own experience that actually the opposite is true, that the capacity to feel deeply is actually a superpower, that feelings are the language of deep connection, of authentic experience, that my felt experience is my soul's language and the sensory system through which my own consciousness tastes, touches, hears, sees, and smells my life experience. I would now see emotions or feelings as a sensory system, directly tied to my intuition, my instincts, and my own unique preferences and perceptions of the world. And that shutting down, cutting off, or numbing my feelings was similar to walking around blindfolded with my hands covering my ears. Now for me, my first step in making friends with my feelings was to stop using drugs and alcohol all the time. And it didn't take long after I stopped medicating myself for me to realize that a lot of my addiction was about trying to manage how deeply I felt things. And one of the very first things I confronted as I began to explore my emotional life was this really vicious self-criticism and harsh judgment. I did a podcast on the inner critic, episode number 28, if you want to learn more about that. It's really great work. Dissolving and updating our inner management system. And a lot of that self-criticism was actually trying to manage and suppress my unfelt experience. I was trying to shame and blame myself into being a less emotional person because I really did feel like emotions were bad. They made other people uncomfortable. They were painful sometimes. But I understand today that by not allowing myself deep sadness or grief, I was robbing myself of my capacity for deep love and compassion, for ecstatic joy and heartfelt connection. Water is often a symbol for emotions, and I naturally orient more toward the element of fire. And the water was always a little scary for me. I didn't learn to swim until I was a teenager, and I didn't become a strong swimmer until I was an adult. And early in my life, maybe it was from seeing the movie Jaws when I was 12, deep water terrified me. And I think there's a direct correlation because I was extremely afraid of my own feelings. They were unknown territory. And like the deep ocean, I was afraid there might be sharks in there that would come up and bite me, and drag me down, and drown me and eat me up. Learning to navigate our emotions can be very much like learning to swim. Throwing a non-swimmer into deep water with no skills or a life preserver is a bad idea. But as I've developed the skills and the muscles and gathered an emotional toolkit, just like snorkeling opens an entire amazing, beautiful world that exists underwater, learning to swim strongly and safely in the mystery of our own emotional experience expands, empowers, and even sustains us in having a full human experience. Feelings offer us tremendous information about ourselves and about others. I've come to understand my own emotional processes as very similar to digestion. And just as important, the food I consume needs to be broken down, separated out. My body absorbs the nutrients that it needs and excretes the rest. And feelings help me process my life experience, my relationships, my spiritual experience. In middle childhood, I had chronic constipation. And it's fascinating how the body, the mind, the emotions, and the spirit are all a system. They aren't separate compartments. They all work together. And I was absolutely emotionally constipated. I had a client recently who's just graduated from college, and he's going to be moving away. And he's actually quite hopeful and excited about the new life that he's starting for himself. But he's got a lot of anxiety about the unknown. He's a person who values routine and rhythm in his life, but he's also deeply connected with his family, particularly his brother. And as we looked a little more deeply at this anxiety, it became clear that it was actually tied to this much deeper, more complicated well of grief and love, of excitement and deep connection. And like myself, he comes from a family where having too many feelings is a problem. And he's a deeply feeling person. He's extremely compassionate to others. And a lot of our work has been helping him to turn his loving compassion toward himself, that he can treat himself as openly and empathically as he treats his friends. And if one of his friends was feeling this complicated mix of loss and hope, and courage and fear, he wouldn't tell them to suck it up. The ceremony of graduation is a ritual marking a transition between periods in life. And transitions are complicated. Old things need to be released so that new things can grow. And our feelings and emotions help us do that process. The internal sorting, the sacred work of honoring what has been, acknowledging that that time has ended, and gathering the resources to move into a new place. Just like plants will come into bloom and have fabulous flowers, and then the petals fall so that the seeds can be scattered. The leaves might fall off the plant. There's a seasonal nature of life that we can trust. We're a part of it, and our emotions are part of the fluid that moves that process along in a healthy way. And just like going to the bathroom, feelings can be messy, but if we hold them in, we get sick. Gotta let that shit go. And crying, grieving may be part of that process, just like peeing and pooping. And it feels really good when you release in that way. And it really does change us, keep us healthy. But emotions don't just keep us healthy. The reason I say feelings are a superpower is that when we open to our own felt experience. It is a particular way to plug into the larger consciousness system. And the language of feelings can be extremely creative, the realm of music, poetry, art, dance, love, sexuality, the idea of communing, to commune with God or with nature, is a particular intimate communication, a sharing of the heart and mind, an intensity of spiritual connection that's a felt experience. And our feelings are the way that we commune with life and with the people, places, animals, and things that are meaningful to us. And if we avoid or suppress or medicate our felt experience, we lose that ability to connect with others and with ourselves. And the more deeply we feel, the more deeply we are able to make and sustain and be nourished and informed by those connections, and to nourish and inform others. Deep feeling is the realm of intuition, other ways of knowing besides the intellect, knowing with our heart, knowing with our gut. And when we just live in our head, we lose access to all the information and possibility that's available through our emotional and body felt experience. I have come to appreciate that I am a very kinesthetic or body-centered person. And when I listen to people, I don't just listen to their words. I feel their energy. I sense their emotions. There's some awareness of their soul or spirit. In fact, I dated this guy once who was super in his head, and I actually had trouble communicating with him sometimes because the words that came out of his mouth didn't match my felt experience of him. And although he wasn't an overt liar, there was a big disconnect between what he said and how he acted. And although what he said was how he would have liked to act, I not only felt the disconnect, I experienced it. For example, he would tell me that he was very attracted to me, but he had a lot of trouble initiating sex. He would tell me, "Of course I want to hear what's happening in your life." And when the conversation would turn to me, he'd be distracted by his phone. And although he was saying the right words, my felt experience was one of disconnection. And it ultimately ended the relationship. So I encourage you to take some time on a regular basis, maybe a few minutes each day, certainly some time each week, to just sit and make room for your own feelings. Invite them as if they're a friend. Be curious, open, give them a lot of space. See what they want to offer you or help you release. Tap through that thin ice of anxiety and start to learn to swim in the beautiful, refreshing, mysterious lake of your own emotional self. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a good review. If you'd like to find out how spiritual psychology might benefit you in your life or learn more about my 3-month mentorship program, send me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. Check us out on Instagram, @OpenDoorGrowth. Deep gratitude to my supporters on Patreon, and blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaVallee McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.